Welcome back, everybody, to Tartarian Tales number 80. This is artofdino.com, and I've got a very cool thing here for number 80, which is all about Tamerlane, as he saw himself, from the Evening Star newspaper of November 1st, 1910. So America was talking about him in the 1910s, and what they had to say was very interesting. It takes from a lot of different sources. Again, it's from a newspaper. This isn't from my mind. So you all know that I am just dealing in theory, and I'm pointing out different sources and different materials so that you can make the best judgment. I don't know about history. Nobody does. Especially not ancient hysterectomy. So either way, that's enough of that, and it's time to move on to Tartarian Tales 80. So take a look at this. It's got some amazing quotes from him. It's got, again, some sources that are, give or take what you will from them. It's a newspaper, so it's clearly propaganda, but also it's got some gems in there, and there's a lot of things that relate to today, and a lot of great comparisons can be made from this ancient leader to the ones now who call themselves leaders but are actually just piles of dump. So here we go. Let's see. The article is called As He Saw Himself, Memoirs of Tamerlane, the Grand Khan of Tartary, full of moral maxims, desired to be known as wise king and patron of learning, had brilliant intellect, says he confounded his enemies with his kindness, but his contemporaries thought otherwise. So you're going to hear a lot of different takes here. And again, I've dealt with a lot of books from the past, from the distant past, that talk about him, and everyone's got a different impression of this guy and what he did. His power just is very mythical. And so take what you will, again, from it. But here we go. By William E. Curtis, special correspondent of the Star and the Chicago Record Herald. Again, November 1st, 1910. So here he says, Constantinople, September 28th, 1910, the political, military, and moral maxims found in the institutes, remember that word, of Tamerlane, the Grand Khan of Tartary, who reigned over 2/3 of the world 500 years ago, are as full of wisdom and philosophy as the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, and were household words in the courts of the Grand Moguls of India, his descendants. One of them, Akbar the Great, 200 years later, actually carried out these regulations in practical form, and his fame as a wise and just ruler is forever secure for that reason. Tamerlane was doubtless illiterate from our standard, but wise in his generation. He was born a nomad shepherd, although his family came from famous stock. He probably never went to school a day in his life, although he is said to have been able to speak in 3 languages, Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. But he had a brilliant intellect and a long course of instruction in that greatest of universities, human experience. Bingo. I like that the author says that, because there is no better teacher than your own human experience. When he reached a degree of power and authority which enabled him to do so, he surrounded himself with men of learning, and although he destroyed Baghdad and Damascus, which were the centers of literary life and scholastic researches in those days, the mosques and colleges which he afterward erected at Samarkand were worthy rivals of the best institutions in those ancient cities. Interesting. Owing to his liberality, Samarkand at the beginning of the 15th century was probably the center of civilization. Very cool. And again, something you don't really hear. Next section, wished to be kindly remembered. This Tartar warrior desired to be remembered by posterity as a wise king and a patron of learning, and he wrote these memoirs late in life because he desired to leave a memorial of himself, which would place him upon a level with the most intelligent of the sovereigns he had overthrown. His sons inherited from him unusual talent, which in some cases amounted to genius, and they founded an empire in India which lasted to our own time. In 1437, Ulugh Beg, a grandson of Tamerlane, built at Samarkand the greatest observatory in the world, and with his own hands prepared astronomical tables which are the wonder of modern astronomers. The 38 years this cultured prince occupied the throne of his father was the golden age of Central Asia. I would love to see those maps, and I wonder if they're different, because right around after that time is when the spherical world started to really appear and materialize. But I kind of have a feeling during this observatory that they were observing a flat plane. So who knows? He gathered about him the most famous men of science of that time, and his artistic taste was displayed in buildings which still stand, at least in 1910. Other of Tamerlane's descendants were also men of learning and patrons of science and art and literature, and by their works it is evident that they desired to be so known. The institutes, quote-unquote, of Tamerlane doubtless attracted great attention in the Muslim world when they first appeared, and were the subject of much comment in 1780, when they were first translated into English. But like many good things, they were buried under a flood of publications and have been forgotten. Their revival would be opportune even at this day. Very interesting. Again, as the 1780s, they were translated into English. So I wonder if those can still be found, because that sounds like a lot of material that was translated. But then, like everything else, it was buried by a bunch of other nonsense. And so it probably didn't get republished, and people probably pushed everything else, and it got, quote unquote, buried. So, again, the same things are happening today, but I wonder if any of those still exist in private collections or anywhere to be found, because I guarantee they've got some good stuff, and it would be amazing to see ancient astronomers using observations and to see whether they came to the same conclusions as Aristotle and, as Galileo and those guys, the spherical worlders, or if they had something completely different that they needed to bury, especially around 1780 when their control was coming back and the reset was hitting hard. So here we go. Next round. I like this round. Some of his political maxims. Now take this into consideration when thinking about our present leaders, because a lot of these sayings are still relevant today and actually pretty amazing. And then when you compare to what the people of today think, the puppets in power, it's probably a lot different, and they don't really have a good, strong backbone in their body. They are just a bunch of weak puppets. So this guy was a rare breed. Some of his political maxims. Among the political maxims which Tamerlane handed down to his successors for their guidance in governing the empire he had established over 2/3 of the continent of Asia are the following, quote unquote: in conducting the concerns of government, take by the hand for assistance deliberation, counsel, vigilance, and circumspection. Yeah, they definitely don't do that anymore. Quote, next, those are worthy only to be counselors who steadfastly adhere to what they say and do. How many present politicians in America alone have violated that on a daily basis? Next one, a friend in all places cometh to use. I agree with that one. Better to have friends than enemies. And if you have them everywhere, it makes life a lot better. Next, one obstinately resolved on resistance, who is dangerous, may often be won by indirect commendation, which he may hear. Very interesting. I like this guy. Unless it be quite necessary, a prince should not displace officers of his own promotion. Again, our leaders could learn a lot, or our fools could learn a lot. Next, since God is one and hath no partner, therefore the ruler over the land must be one only. Interesting. Maybe that's why he just continued to conquer. Next, it is good to pardon, to be liberal, to be merciful, but it is better to be just. I like that. Those who are disposed to hurt others should not be admitted to intimacy. Interesting. Next, a prince must be just and good as well as valiant. That's also great. Next, not only good and useful men are to be rewarded, but enemies and traitors on submission can be pardoned and made useful if their hearts can be won, especially if they are brave and sagacious men. Very true. Good to spare them. And again, these are things a lot of people reading the history books wouldn't think that this guy would say, because of the way they steer the books. Teachers of the divine law should furnish an example of their precepts. That's the church could learn from that puppy. Next, no prince can be strong and secure unless he is religious. Nice. Not demonic, not satanic, religious, spiritual, probably added. Plenty and population are the main ends in the government. They've exploited that one. A prince should hear advice from everyone, but he should so attend to none as to make them equal or superior to himself in wisdom or in authority. As a leader, that makes sense. Too great a share of government should be trusted to none, but the power of every officer, even the most inferior, should be absolute over all below him. Interesting. Ministers should not be condemned except on fair trial and clear proof, because many seek their ruin, either envying them or plotting against their sovereign. And Trump is an example of that. Not be condemned except on fair trial and clear proof. We seem to lose that in America over the past several years. He who forgetteth his duty once should be trusted no more. And that one is one that I firmly believe, and I'm shocked at how many people, especially during the COVID nightmare, would believe and trust these absolute fools and demonic souls, and people were trusting them like they were like the gospel, or like they were receiving words from God themselves, and they sure weren't. And these people just couldn't be trusted ever, and then to trust them ever again is mind-blowing to me. Once you mess up and you show some slip up of a major character flaw, you are no longer looked at the same by me ever again. And I think Tamerlane felt that way too, and I like that. He who in the hour of trial searcheth after excuses, or would transfer until tomorrow the business of today, let him be held in contempt. Makes sense. If you're true and you're honest, you have nothing to hide, and you want to get justice served immediately. If you try to delay it, it means you're hiding something. Again, look at America. If a good servant be unjustly put to shame or mortification, let it be repaired promptly. That's nice. I like that. When one who hath forsaken his master returns of his own accord, let him be received with kindness, but not honor. Again, awesome. This guy has got a great judge and sense of judgment. And again, everyone in power and control today could learn from this. Here are some more quotes that are reliance on divine favor. I found these also amazingly interesting. These are samples of the wisdom of the great Tamerlane in political policy and in his institutes. He gives a similar series for the guidance of his successors in military affairs. He also gives a series of theological and religious maxims which are equally sagacious. For example, he says, "Victory proceedeth not from the greatness of armies, nor defeat from inferiority of numbers, for conquest is obtained by divine favor and skillful measures." I like that, and if this world is orchestrated by a creator, he knows the outcome, or she or it knows the outcome to a lot of things, and it's good to be in their favor, I guess. I opened the holy book, the Quran, for an omen, and this sacred verse came forth as a sign. How oft do the weak vanish, the powerful by the permission of Almighty God? I'm not sure, but hopefully we can in the coming year. The faith of force is not that which worketh by love. Imitate thy benevolent Creator, that he may increase his mercies to thee. I like that. Thus I formed measures and designs for the reduction of kingdoms, for the obtainment of empire, for defeating armies, for circumventing enemies, for making friends of foes, and for coming in among friends and enemies. Interesting. Throughout the entire narrative are frequent references to his dependence upon divine guidance and his faith in the efficacy of prayer. For example, he says, "And I, in that night on the top of that hill, was employed in humiliations and supplications to the throne of Almighty God. And between sleeping and waking I heard a voice, as of someone saying to me, Timur, victory and conquest and triumph are thine. And when the morning broke, I prayed with my people and mounted my horse and assaulted the enemy in 4 different places." He gives a minute account of the plans of his principal battles, which were designed in detail in advance and explained carefully to each of his commanders. The strategic movements designed by him are considered by high military authorities as equal to those of Napoleon. He justifies his policy of conquest thus, quote, "And behold, at all times thought there was not more worthy the valor of princes than the conquering of kingdoms and empires and the waging of holy wars with infidels and unbelievers." This guy, and who knows? I mean, there could be a whole spiritual reality that we have that's been taken down as a result of this passing and just the time, the passage of time. And there's all kinds of talk about the Tibetans and the spirituals, how they were just not embracing Christianity because it didn't have the magic that they had. So that magic must have been a clear part. And if you are touched by God, if you're living in a world where you and your people are fully believing in the power of God and the Creator and whatnot, then who's to say the potential that exists? Nowadays, we have a culture and society that's like ruled by the other one, the evil, dark side, and it shows in the weird, bizarre things that are happening all over the world in this modern era, which is putting us further and further away from the divine touch and miracles. So this is another section. It's called Planned Invasion of Europe. A couple interesting parts. Check this out. After he had conquered all Asia, it was Tamerlane's intention to invade Europe. He was urged to the invasion of the Chinese Empire by national honor and religious zeal. Gibbon says the torrents which he had shed of Mussulman blood could be expiated only by an equal destruction of infidels, and as he now stood at the gate of paradise, he might best secure his glorious entrance by demolishing the idols of China, founding mosques in every city, and establishing the profession of faith in one God and his prophet, Muhammad. From the Irtish and the Volga to the Persian Gulf, from the Ganges to Damascus and the Grecian archipelago, Asia was in the hand of Timur. His armies were invincible, his ambition was boundless, and his zeal might aspire to conquer and convert the Christian nations of the West, which already trembled at his name. The fears and fancy of nations ascribed to the ambitious Tamerlane a new design of vast and romantic conquest, a design of subduing Egypt and Africa, marching from the Nile to the Atlantic Ocean, entering Europe by the Straits of Gibraltar, and after imposing his yoke upon the kingdoms of Christendom, and of returning home by the deserts of Russia and Tartary. The, quote, institutes justify this apprehension. He seems to have been convinced that he was the chosen of God to extend the faith of Islam, and says, quote, and when I sought an omen in the holy book, this sacred verse always came forth. O prophet, fight with the infidels and the unbelievers. And I placed a helmet of steel upon my head, and I clothed myself in the armor of David. I hung a scimitar of Misr by my side, and I sat on the throne of war. I find that very interesting because a lot of people in the 10, 12 tribes of Israel and all these, whatever they are, I'm not very familiar with a lot of that, but a lot of people have connected Tartary with that and one of those tribes. So again, this is kind of interesting that he'd wear the armor of David. Timur had a suit of armor which he believed that David, king of Israel, had forged with his own hands. It was presented to him by Hippocrates, the Christian king of Georgia, when he invaded that country. After Hippocrates had been conquered and his kingdom annexed to the empire of Tamerlane, he accepted the faith of Islam and became a great favorite with the conqueror. And among the rules which I established for the support of my glory and empire, the first was this, that I promote the worship of Almighty God, and at all times and at all places support the true faith. I love this guy. I'm not going to lie, he sounds pretty cool, and the world needs kind of someone like this to bring the magic back and get rid of the evil, vile filth. Here we go. And lastly, the article concludes with Tamerlane's view of himself. Tamerlane conquered 20 independent kingdoms and carried the crowns to Samarkand, his capital. He commanded his armies in 35 campaigns, and his biographers insist that he never lost a battle. He burned hundreds of cities and towns and erected upon the ruins of Baghdad a pyramid of 90,000 human heads. And yet he says that he never fought a battle except to deliver the oppressed from the hands of the oppressor. So I gotta again say, I like the guy's mentality, but I don't like the violent stuff. I'm not a violent guy. I'm a pacifist. I'm an artist. I don't like this stuff at all. But if these people were pure evil, then a leader's got to do what a leader's got to do, an ancient leader at least. I did not cause any one person to suffer for the guilt of another, he says again. I drew to me the obedient of the people of God by complacency, by mercy, and by indulgence, and I ever adhered to equity and justice. I retired far from cruelty and oppression. I never gave way to the thirst of revenge, nor did I ever satiate my resentment on anyone. Those who injured me I delivered over to the justice of the Almighty, and to those who had envied my fortune and who had endeavored to subvert my power, I conducted myself with such kindness and generosity that they were confounded at my goodness and sunk under the sense of their unworthiness. That is a tactic I like a lot. I do that to people on a minor level all the time. That is Tamerlane's opinion of himself, but it is not confirmed by the judgment of his contemporaries. He was undoubtedly the greatest of all the sovereigns and soldiers Asia had ever produced, but was brutal and barbarous in warfare. Gibbon, the great historian, says, On the throne of Samarkand, he displayed his magnificent power, listened to the complaints of the people, distributed a just measure of punishment and rewards, employed his riches in the architecture of palaces and temples, and gave audience to the ambassadors of Egypt, Arabia, India, Tartary, Russia, and Spain. Whatsoever might be the blessings of his administration, they evaporated with his life. To reign rather than govern was the ambition of his children and grandchildren, the enemies of each other and of the people. A fragment of his empire was upheld with some glory by Shah Rukh, his youngest son, but after his decease, the scene was again involved in darkness and blood, and before the end of a century, Transoxiana and Parata were trampled by the Uzbeks from the north and the Turkmen of the black and white sheep. The race of Timur would have been extinct if a hero, his descendant in the 5th degree, had not fled before the Uzbek arms to the conquest of Hindostan. His successors, the great Moguls, extended their sway from the mountains of Kashmir to Cape Cormoran and from Kandahar to the Gulf of Bengal. Since the reign of Aurangzeb, their empire has been dissolved. Their treasures of Delphi have been rifled by a Persian robber, and the riches of their kingdoms are now possessed by a company of Christian merchants of a remote island in the Northern Ocean, parentheses, the East India Company. Very interesting conclusion there, as a lot of people have come to the conclusion that the East India Company arose from somewhere very mysterious and gained a lot of power and dominance quick. And it makes sense if these were the people that completely robbed the Tamerlane's empire of all the treasures that they had collected. That was basically the ultimate treasure chest in all of the world, in all of the realm, and the East India Company took it. No wonder why they had control and so much power over trade, over everything, over the sea, over whatnot. They could control the information, they could control the products, the production of everything. Tamerlane was clearly the last of the world's great leaders. All these other people in history, and Napoleon and all them, can't be trusted. There's too many weird loopholes, and who knows if they didn't just repurpose all these old stories and put them into new stories, because people didn't know. There wasn't cell phones documenting everything. There wasn't a way to disprove the media at that time. You really just had to kind of trust it. So again, that's what we're doing here. I'm just exposing you guys to different Tartarian elements. That's what Tartarian Tales is all about, just bringing out different things. Whether they're true or not, they do add to the overall essence of what's happening. They add to the overall story because they are part of the story, whether they're lies or true. There's always some truth behind them. And it's clear that this guy, in order to do what he did, had to have been a masterful leader. He had to have the ability to get people behind him. He had to have the ability to conquer a place and then have those people get behind him. So one way to do that is to work with the power of God and the miracles of God and the magic of God. And I don't know much about the Quran and that and whatnot, but nowadays I know how long in my past generations in life that they have been trying to discredit it and steer people in the direction of Christianity and whatnot. And when you weigh both of them on the same scale and you figure it out and you see the evil and good in both, I guess, you're then able to make your own conclusions. I won't do that for you, but I can tell you that the ancient world had an amazing magic to it, an amazing connection to the divine, and I haven't seen anything like that in a really long time. And I wonder, again, if these ancient buildings, to be inspired by the divine is a way to create all these ancient structures that we see that seem to be impossible to construct and build and create and even come up with in our time. They're beautifully proportioned. They've got artwork that is just absolutely heavenly, and it's a lot different than the modern world we are living in. So again, take what you will from this, draw your own conclusions. That's what it's all for. We don't know about the past. No one can be certain about what happened in the past. We cannot be. So we have to theorize. It's what it's all about. And together we can come up with more and more pieces, and maybe someday we will now pillage the Vatican libraries, pillage the Smithsonian, and now we have to go to the East India company as well and find their stash of stuff and release that to the world. If all three of those treasure troves of ancient information were to be released and unveiled to the public, or even submitted to an AI that was then able to use that information to ask questions about the reality of things, that would be amazing too. Either way, something has to be done. Someday I hope we can get to the bottom of all this lost wisdom of the ancients and all this knowledge in ancient tech and see if how much of our imagination and theories were right and how much was wrong. It would be very interesting. One day, we'll keep getting there. Maybe at Tartarian Tales 1000. Who knows? Bless you all.